We are back live here on TikTok. We are going to be talking news and politics, waiting on people to join the room. Um, so far, nobody's here, but we got a lot to talk about today. We got Donald Trump holding this and waiting on people to join the room. Um, so far, nobody's here, but we got a lot to talk about today. We got Donald Trump holding this Antifa summit thing at the White House, appearing to fall asleep during that. You have the shutdown, government still shut down. That's not changing anytime soon. Democrats are holding the line there. And we are, um, you know, dealing with all of it. Now, Republicans are the ones who are ultimately going to lose in this government shutdown. I see Jace out there. Nice to see you, Jace. But we got this government shutdown going on. And with it, Republicans are going to be the one to ultimately lose in the government shutdown. Now, they are going to end up ultimately caving. I guarantee you that Democrats are going to be able to hold the line here. Because as these things go, Republicans are looking more and more inept. They're looking more and more like the bad guys here. You got Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, coming out saying, well, no, we don't need to back pay the military. They'll just get paid when we fund the government. We don't need to pass anything to pay the military right now. We did our job. We passed the CR to fund the government. That's good enough, right? And yet they want to be the party of the military and the troops, and they use that against us all the time. Republicans don't care, and they're looking horrible every day with this government shutdown. You have, oh, I see Jay's out there now. You have Dementia Donnie dozing off during his Antifa roundtable. And that is just another sign of him being very unwell. Jay says they are acting like Trump, getting desperate. Oh, yeah, they are very desperate here. They're trying to back the Democrats into a corner. Problem is, Democrats aren't budging. They think they've got the upper hand, and they don't. And I really think Mike Johnson's speakership may be in jeopardy after this is over. Jay of the Canadian Path says, Dementia Donnie dozing off. Top 10 tongue twisters, right? Could be, yeah. But he appears to be dozing off in public yet again. And it's just another sign that he's not well. We found out that he is going Friday to Walter Reed. They're claiming it is going to be another yearly checkup, but he had one of those in April. So what's really going on? And in April, that's when they came out with his chronic venous insufficiency diagnosis, and they said it was weak hands because of excessive handshaking. And if they told us that much, how bad is the truth? So let's see what they come out and say after this report. Now, Donnie, of course, is going to come out and say, well, I passed a cognitive test, and I'm as fit as a fiddle. I'm as fit as a 20-year-old or some bullshit. But the reality is going to be, what does his administration say about it, etc. It is going to be really bad for them, knowing he's going to the doctor again. Jay says, Dems have nothing to lose, keep it up. Yeah, they have nothing to lose here at all. They need to just keep pushing, keep hammering away at the Republicans. And ultimately, I think the Republicans end up caving. You have, surprisingly, some people like Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out saying, we need to do something about the Affordable Care Act. Now, she stopped short of saying that they should tie it to this CR and funding the government, but she's at least on board for extending the Affordable Care Act subsidies because she knows how bad it potentially could be. Jay says, why would anyone vote Republican after this is over is beyond me. Because there is a group of people that will vote Republican no matter who, no matter what, and they have been lied to for so long. They are convinced that everything that is wrong with the world is Democrats' fault. You know, you have small towns, and I see it here in Iowa. You have small towns that have had the same mayor for 20 years. They voted Republican up and down every election. city, county, etc., and even for their state representatives, and things continue to suck, but somehow it's still the Democrats' fault. It makes no sense. But they bought into it because they don't want to admit that they're wrong and that they are, uh, you know, not getting their way, or that their representatives made the wrong choices or whatever. They don't want to admit it. So they keep voting Republican, hoping that it's going to get better, and it never does. This government shutdown is bad news for Republicans, especially if Democrats can hold the line, force them to cave, and the Democrats can turn and use it against Republicans into the midterms. And if this goes into next year, into the midterm, if it goes deep into next year, it is only going to continue to bury the Republicans going into the midterms. Now, they may try to use the shutdown as some sort of a reason to ignore or not hold elections, but that doesn't really work, because come January 3rd, 2027, this Congress ceases to exist. There is no mechanism in place to extend those terms without passing a constitutional amendment. And they don't have the votes for that. Democrats aren't going to support it. And even if they could, or even if they did, there's just not going to be enough state legislators. Democrats aren't going to support it. And even if they could, or even if they did, there's just not going to be enough state legislatures that are going to support it. They would need 38. That is a ridiculously high bar. It ain't going to happen. So they have to have, the midterm elections. They're going to have to happen. Now, some Republican-led states may try to do something to say, well, we're going to just not hold elections and just give the win to the Republican candidate. And that would be very anti-democratic. That'd be against everything we stand for, and would most certainly be attempted to be, it would be challenged in court. Jay says, no way it can continue much longer if airports shut down. Yeah. Yeah. If the airport shut down, that's what it ended up leading to the last shutdown being, under Donald Trump ending, was when air traffic controllers quit showing up for work. And and flights quit moving, suddenly they were willing to work. Yeah, Jay says, and Congress ceasing to exist does not make Dementia Don a dictator. It doesn't stop it. Exactly. It doesn't make him a dictator. It just means there's no functional Congress. It doesn't transfer their abilities to anybody else. It just, until there is a Congress that is sworn in and duly seated, appropriations, there is nothing. And the other two branches can't just start assuming those powers. That is not listed anywhere in the Constitution. And even this Supreme Court would not do that. Two branches can't just start assuming those powers. That is not listed anywhere in the Constitution. And even this Supreme Court would not do that. They would not just say, well, because Congress doesn't exist, Donnie can just do whatever he wants with the budget. They would not just say, well, because Congress doesn't exist, Donnie can just do whatever he wants with the budget. I don't see this Supreme Court, despite how corrupt they are, doing that. Jay says, but that's in a normal world. Talking about the airport shutting down being what would hold Republicans to do something. I still think it could. That might be what actually does it, because airports make a lot of money. There's big money there. They donate to campaigns, etc. And it all comes back to financial backing. It all comes down to backing, and Republicans like money. So if the money's there for them to support getting the government back open, they'll get the government back open. Yeah, we have Donnie trying to hold this press conference talking about Antifa. That didn't end well. He's trying to tell influencers to go out looking for Antifa and reporting them to the FBI. Antifa is not an organized group. It's not like the group in the South that wears white hats and is known for burning crosses. There's no organized leadership. They're not the Proud Boys. They're not the Oath Keepers. Um, it's an idea, and Donald Trump doesn't get that. He doesn't understand it. I guarantee you, he hasn't looked into it. Somebody gave him some buzzwords to say, and that's all he's going off of. Donald Trump is barely aware most of the time about what's going on, and that's it. Jay says Antifa isn't an organization. They're a decentralized movement. Yeah, it's an idea. They're anti-fascist, anti-fascism. And we would have been considered as a country too. I mean, they just don't understand what it means. The Republicans have been able to take buzzwords like this for decades and convince you that they're bad. Jay says it's like V said in V for Vendetta, ideas are bulletproof. Kind of. Kind of. I mean, some ideas you can beat back with, proof and logic, etc., but this is different. Um, but ultimately, and you're gone. Nick Nack, no, it's not embarrassing to be a Democrat. It'd be embarrassing to be seen in public wearing a red hat. SoCal Bev says, no, I'm saying today she would go after Antifa the way they've gone after cartels is not good. No, it's not. Because that's turning on the American citizens. And I think Republicans only take that for so long before they turn on Donald Trump. I think they will allow it up and probably till the point when it becomes something the media plays over and over and over again of American citizens getting taken out like they did the fishing boats in Venezuela, etc. Republicans, I said a lot that Republicans are doing the math about when's the time to break away from Donald Trump. And people ask me, well, or people have said, well, how haven't they realized it yet? It's about the 30% of the base. That 35% that will only vote for the Republican Party as long as Donald Trump is part of the party or at the head of the party is crazy, right? They want those people to show up and vote. And if they turn on Donald Trump, they will never vote for a Republican. And they know if that 30% doesn't show up for the midterms, they're going to lose the midterms. So they're trying to figure out how they can, at what point can they still win their midterms by walking away from Donald Trump, but also not getting that 30% to turn on them. They are trying to do mental gymnastics and trying to keep this thing, afloat. And it's not going to work. It really won't. They're probably going to lose the midterms. And that's why I keep saying that after the midterms, but before the new Congress sets in January, that there's a chance these Republicans turn around and get rid of Donald Trump because he's going to be a liability for 28. Jay says they're going to lose the midterms anyway. The mask is off and the people don't like what they see. Yeah, I think they're going to lose the midterms. And it's going to be, I'm thinking they get the Senate at 51. I don't see them getting much more. I mean, that would be, 4 seats they pick up? And that's probably a stretch. but I think they can. I think they may get at most, if they get the Senate, it'll be at 51 seats. But I think they flip the House by 30 or 40. Mr. Mann says liberals need help. No, we don't. And I already blocked you. Don't need to engage with the Trumplafucks. It'd be embarrassing to be out wearing a red hat these days, going around supporting a convicted felon, going around supporting a guy who has wrecked this country, who is what appears to be committing war crimes, ripping up the Constitution, and only cares about himself. And if he was any sort of leader, any sort of negotiator, he'd be at the negotiating table right now trying to get a deal to reopen the government. But he's not a negotiator, he's a bully, and he's just trying, he said, okay, pass our thing. Open the government back up, and then we negotiate. That's not how negotiations work. It's not give everything to Donald Trump and then do it. No. But Donald Trump has always negotiated that way. Same thing with him saying, well, maybe we don't need to back pay any of the people who are furloughed. Maybe we don't need to pay them for not working. Well, if you guys would have funded the government and kept it open and negotiated in good faith, maybe, they wouldn't be furloughed right now. They want to blame Democrats. Oh, excuse me. But they want to blame the Democrats for all this. It's not the Democrats' fault. They have negotiated in good faith repeatedly with the Republicans, and the Republicans constantly fuck them over. They turn around and they do things like they pass the one big beautiful bill, cuts a bunch of programs that they had previously agreed to spending levels on, in good faith with Republicans. Then they pass the rescissions package, something that hadn't been done in decades, and turned around and cut a bunch of programs that both sides had previously agreed to funding for. So why would the Democrats say, okay, yeah, we're going to keep the government open at current levels, including all those cuts you just did, and then we'll talk and we'll come to the negotiating table? No, why would they do that? Jay says Republicans have as much of a chance of doing anything good as British John has of not joking about my mom. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've seen British John join in the lives when you're nowhere around, Jed. He still makes the comments. So you're probably right with that analogy. And for those of you who aren't aware, he's talking about British John joining in over on the Rational Boomers lives, and some of the other lives around here, where he jumps in, and if Jay's there, it's an immediate joke about Jay's mom. SoCal Bev says, saw news today that military going to food banks is increasing. Hoping they connect the dots to Trump. Yeah. And Mike Johnson said today, we don't need to pass any bill to keep the military paid right now. We passed our bill. The Senate just needs to pass our bill, and then the government reopens and they'll get paid. We don't need to pass anything else. They'll get paid when we reopen the government. Zero care about making sure that they actually get their paychecks. And I don't want to hear Republicans say how they support the troops. They don't. At all. They just don't support the troops. If they did, Mike Johnson would have called the House into session. They'd be voting on a measure to make sure the military gets paid and they don't miss their next pay date. But they haven't done it yet. Now, they might between here and that payday, but it's getting to the point where I think they get paid the 15th. This is the 8th. They've got a week. And if they don't get, something passed to make sure it happens, they probably have to have it done in the next couple of days. Otherwise, it'll pass the deadline, because it takes time to process all of that for them to make sure they get their paycheck on time. But again, Republicans want you to believe that they are all for the troops, and they're not. They do this time and time again. They want to pass, legislate, or they want to say, well, we can't afford to do this or that for foreign aid. We've got homeless veterans. So they bring up a bill. Let's give money to homeless veterans. And then guess what? It gets shot down. Let's give money to homeless veterans. And then guess what? It gets shot down. Republicans will constantly tell us that how the Democrats don't support the troops and don't support the military, but they're constantly voting against the military and doing things like this. In fact, in a previous shutdown, they made sure, ahead of the shutdown, they had passed something to make sure the military got paid because they knew they were going to be shutting it down. They saw it coming. They couldn't agree on keeping the government open, but they said, hey, let's make sure we fund our troops and our military. They saw this coming a mile away too. But instead of being in session and passing this, Mike Johnson said, nope, we're going on recess. But part of the reason they're still on recess, he still hasn't sworn in Representative Grijalva of Arizona. She won her election going on 2 weeks ago. He doesn't want to swear her in because of the discharge petition. And he doesn't want a floor vote about the Epstein files. That vote is going to wreck the Republican Party because there's nothing they can do. They are backed into a corner. And for those of you out there that are sci-fi nerds, Star Trek fans, this is their Kobayashi Maru. This is their no-win situation. They are backed into a corner with the Epstein files. They vote to release the Epstein files. Donald Trump gets pissed. Maybe other high-profile Republicans that could be in those files get pissed off. They got to deal with primary challenges, etc., all because they released the files. But if they say, no, we don't want to release the files, they have to end up, defending their position to not release the Epstein files. And MAGA wants the Epstein files released because they are convinced it is nothing but Democrats in the Epstein files. They are 100% convinced. The MAGA voter is convinced they're going to see nothing but Democratic names, including Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Barack Obama. You name the Democrat, they're in the files according to MAGA. And the fact that these Republicans are blocking it is blowing their minds. They are so confused. They don't know how to react to that because they don't know why the Republicans would not want to embarrass the Democrats. And they haven't connected the dots yet that they're just protecting other Republicans that are in the list. Jay says, yes, somebody finally said it. Totally nerding out right now. Yeah. For those of you that maybe don't know what I'm talking about when I said the Kobayashi Maru, in Star Trek, there is a test. It is a no-win situation for every wannabe captain. They have to go in Star Trek, and they have to try to save this ship. If you take enough time and you save the ship, you get blown to bits. If you don't do anything, they get blown to bits. Supposedly, there's no way to win. Famously, in the Star Trek universe, Captain Kirk found a way to cheat the game. He cheated the system, saved the ship, and won because he never believed in a no-win situation. So that's what I was talking about with that. Alexander says they need to be stopped right in their tracks. Are you talking about Republicans? I mean, because right now they are. They're stopped. They're not getting anything accomplished. And the best thing we can do to stop them in their tracks is to get out and vote in the midterms. If we flip the House like I think we can, then nothing gets done in government for 2 years. The best they can hope for is 2 years of clean CRs to keep the government open, very little movement, and they'll get about as much done as Joe Biden got done during his last term, or last half of his term. That's the best we can hope for. But the thing is that with Democrats in control of the House, they would have investigative power. Some of these people, like Pam Bondi, like RFK Jr., Kash Patel would get pulled in front of Congress. They would be investigated. They would have to answer tough questions, as it is Congress's job to handle oversight. And when they do that, they're not going to have the same immunity that they think they have right now with Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump's gone, and the next after 29, when the next president is in power, assuming it's a Democrat, and assuming we have a halfway decent attorney general, not a Merrick Garland, they're going to be investigated. And if there's criminal charges that can come out from it, there's going to be criminal charges. I guarantee it. They're not going to do what they did with January 6th and Merrick Garland again. And if they do, I will be out here doing what I'm doing now, as long as I'm still making content, and I will be calling Democrats to task for it, because that would be bullshit. Merrick Garland sat back and said, we're not doing anything about Donald Trump because it's a political matter. But the Republicans already said it's not political, it's criminal. He had the go-ahead to deal with it when he didn't get impeached and removed. Both sides wanted the other side to deal with it, and nothing happened. Cora says he doesn't plan to leave. He will start a civil war first. He's not smart enough to start a civil war. Donald Trump is not smart enough to pull it off. And every day he's getting weaker and weaker with what he's doing. And I don't think he makes it to the end of his term. He may not want to leave, but there's no mechanism, even if we're in the middle of a war internationally, doesn't matter. We will have an election, and there will be a new winner. Even if we're in a domestic war, another civil war, like they seem to think that it's going to be just like the one in the 1800s and the 1860s, with military in the streets and marching and all that fun stuff. If that happens, we'll still hold an election. They did during that Civil War, and guess what? We'll do it again. We have always had elections. And that's there's nothing he can do to prevent them. And elections are state run. I mean, he could try to mess things up, but it ain't gonna work. Sina says, Trump must go. He's no leader. No, he's no leader. Jay says, yeah, right. Mr. Orange Liver Mortis lasts that long? Jay says, yeah, right. Mr. Orange Liver Mortis lasts that long? Office at the latest would be January 20th, 2029. I don't think he makes it that long. I think one way or the other, he ends his term early. Whether, the Big Mac finally gets him, whether something else finally gets him, or his own party turns on him and they remove him themselves, something happens. I just don't think he makes it all the way to 29. I think we will end up with President Vance in between. And even with President Vance, he doesn't have the sway over Congress. He doesn't have the sway over the voting base. He's not going to have the same effect as having Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. He won't be able to bring in that 30-35% voting base I was talking about earlier, where he ends up, losing the midterms, or because they don't turn up to vote without that 30-35% base. J.D. Vance doesn't have the same sway, so it won't matter. Gallifrey Lives says, hey, Eric, how about the Supreme Court case coming up? Louisiana v. Callis on voting rights. I'm not overly familiar with that one. I think that's about redrawing voting maps, I think, on how they can gerrymander the maps versus race representation, etc. I'm going to have to look into that one a little more. And with this court, who knows? There's a lot of issues where you can say you don't know what they're going to do, There's a few where you got to say, yeah, I'm pretty positive of what they're going to do. But with this court, especially for whatever reason, Clarence Thomas, he seems to be against civil rights of any kind. SoCal Bev says, I don't think he'll make it to the midterms. There's a good chance. Oh, Gallifrey Lives says, that's it. They could pick up 19 seats in the House. So they pick up 19. I think the Democrats are gonna win the House by 40. That means we still take the House by 20. By 21, actually. I don't think it matters. I think unless they, I don't think it matters. I think unless they something flips. Jay of the Canadian Path says Clarence Thomas is paid by a horrible right winger to do his bidding. He answers to one guy. Yeah, Clarence Thomas is corrupt. We know that. Unfortunately, there's no strong ethics for the Supreme Court, and there's nothing they can do besides impeach and remove, and they have never successfully impeached and removed a Supreme Court justice. It's never happened. And the Democrats will, even after 28, I don't know that they can get to a 67 vote majority, barring some miracle, that they could end up having that big of a lead. That is a high bar. They would need Republican support, and I just don't see that happening. Their best bet would be for Clarence Thomas to retire with a Democrat in office to replace him, but he would try to not do that either, because he would want to be replaced by a Republican. And if he's looking at it, he may try to retire before the end of this administration to be replaced by Donald Trump. But if in the midterms we give the Democrats the Senate, a conservative would never be approved. So we wouldn't get somebody as far right and as far corrupt as a Clarence Thomas. Jules says, hey, Eric, can Little Johnson hold off on the swearing in of the Arizona rep indefinitely? I don't know. I don't know what can actually be done to force the rep to be sworn in. Mike Johnson's playing a dangerous game, though, because he has sworn in Republican representatives in pro forma sessions before. I think ultimately he will have to. At some point they're going to return to full session, and he's going to have to swear her in. But I think he's going to try to hold it off for as long as he can. But here's the thing. Democrats are going to be back in control of the House at some point. And at some point, a Republican is going to win a special election. And what they're not seeing is that Democrats could do this same thing. But they don't think about that because they expect Democrats to take the high road. They expect Democrats to be good people and play by the rules. Well, some of the Democrats are getting sick of playing by the rules because they're getting sick of, getting burned. Jay says, no, he can't. Will and Mike covered it on the podcast. Like I said, I think ultimately he's going to have to. He's just going to try to delay it for as long as he can because he doesn't want his party to go on record for voting for the Epstein files. What would actually force his hand is if we could get one more Republican to break ranks and sign off on the discharge petition without her. That would get us to 218, and then he'd have no reason to hold off on swearing her in because her vote wouldn't matter at that point. They'd have the number. And I wish one of the members of the House, one of the Republicans, would sign off on the discharge petition. And, just because they signed the discharge petition does not mean they have to vote for the resolution. They could sign the discharge petition and then vote against it. They could. Why they would, I don't know, but they could. Jackie says Johnson's doing anything he wants because, yeah, he's trying to. He's trying to. Jules asks, is it entirely up to Little Johnson to bring Congress back into session? It is up to him about when they return the House back into session. The Senate's been there this whole time. Senate has been there the whole time. Every day, well, every business day, they are holding votes, trying to fund the government, trying to get it back open. It's up to Mike Johnson to say, okay, we're going back today. But I think ultimately, if they have to go back and vote for a Democrat, and they pass a Democratic-led CR, including the Affordable Care Act subsidies and stuff, after it passes, I expect a vote of no confidence. I do. I expect the Republicans to try to remove him. And then we're back into nothing getting done in the House because there's no speaker. Once they remove him, they would have to find a new Speaker of the House to get anything done. And we went through this when they removed Kevin McCarthy. It took them 3 weeks to find Mike Johnson. I think, ultimately, I don't know that he survives the shutdown and the Epstein file release. If the discharge petition gets, maybe he survives the shutdown, and then they hold the vote on the discharge petition. And if that gets passed around him, maybe he survives the shutdown, and then they hold the vote on the discharge petition. And if that gets passed around him, trying to block it, I think they sacrifice him, and they vote to remove him, and they come up with somebody else. But who that somebody else might be is anybody's guess. They don't have a very deep bench in the Republican Party, in the Republican House. Who are they going to get? Jim Jordan? Jim Jordan hasn't done a damn thing since he's been in the House. He's never once passed a bill. He's never authored a bill that has gotten passed. He's voted on bills that have passed, but he has never once authored a bill. Who are they going to get? Marjorie Taylor Greene? I don't think that's likely. One of the last times they kept putting Donald Trump's name in the hat. Well, he can't be president and Speaker of the House. Jay says the next Speaker of the House could literally be the ghost of Ronald Reagan and be a better pick. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Reagan-era Republicans would mop the floor with our current Republican Party. And some of them were there for Reagan. A la Chuck Grassley. Hell, Nixon-era Republicans. If we had Nixon Republicans in Congress right now, Donald Trump would have been impeached and removed by now. Hagbard Celine says there might be a Dem that voted for Marjorie Taylor Greene. Nah. I doubt that. Aurelius says they're banking on a full dictatorship to make this meaningless. But they can't. The only way they could make a full dictatorship would be to replace the Constitution. That ain't going to happen. It's just not. There's no way it happens. They're wrongly thinking that they are going to survive through the midterms at this point. And I think they are in for a rude awakening. They think that they have somehow successfully gaslit the American public into believing everything that they're saying. They are convinced right now that they can do everything and that they're not going to be held accountable in the midterms. They think they have successfully gotten it to the point where they have some kind of infallible plan. And I think it's because they didn't expect to win in 24. They didn't expect to win last November. They saw what we saw. They expected Kamala Harris to win. They expected her to retake the House. They expected the Dems to hold the Senate. And then somehow they fell ass backwards into Donald Trump being president with both chambers of Congress. And now they are surprised as fuck, and they're trying to figure out what to do here. And they think, well, because we won against those innumerable odds, we should have lost. Well, we can do whatever we want because we're gonna win again. No, no. We should have lost. Well, we can do whatever we want because we're gonna win again. No, no. It was a freaking fluke that they won the way they did. And in part because Kamala Harris was forced to run when she did. She was a great candidate, but she never should have been picked with 107 days to go to the election. I said it at the time. It was a bad move. I thought she was a great candidate. I thought she could win, but it was a bad move. They should have either let Joe run the race or Joe Biden should have resigned and let her be president. That would have taken away the historic nature of it all, the shock factor of it all. And then because she would have been the incumbent going in, I think it would have been better for her. And I don't think we would have had, Eric has said this before on the podcast. Yeah, I think it's because of the base. There is that 30 to 35% of the Republican Party that will not vote if they turn on Donald Trump. Because it's a big chunk of voters that weren't overly political beforehand. He brought them into the Republican Party. And without him, they go back to wherever they were, burying their heads in the sand and not paying attention to politics. Tony says, don't forget, Kamala almost won with only 107 days to campaign. Yeah. She could have won, but if she would have had, if she would have been running since the beginning of primary season, she probably would have won. If even with 107 days, if Joe Biden had resigned and let her become president, I think she would have won. Jules says, so with all the efforts to redistrict, if there's a huge blue wave, does the redistricting help? Actually, the redistricting could bite Republicans in the ass. So you think of it this way. You got some of these districts like in Texas. Republican candidate wins by 65% of the vote every single time. But because they're redistricting, now they're only expected to get 54% of the vote. Democrats outperform by 5-6%, they win. They could do all of this and still lose the redistrict seats that they thought they were gaining. So those stay Democrat. And some of the other safe seats may also flip Democrat. It could come back to end up really biting Republicans in the ass when it's all said and done. Aurelis says she needed to run a Sanders-like platform, but the donors turned her and she lost. Yeah, that was part of it. Turned her and she lost. Yeah, that was part of it. But part of it was, as the sitting vice president, again, that was part of it. But part of it was, as the sitting vice president, again, playing by standard rules and standard decorum, and by what the Democratic Party told her, they wanted her to walk the line and not turn on Joe Biden. Biden didn't do this. I would do X, Y, and Z different. She had to come out and say things like, I supported everything he did. And because voters connected the two and said, well, things aren't as good as I'd like them to be, I'm going to vote for the other guy. It was a bad ploy. They didn't give her the breathing room she needed in order to run a decent campaign. Hagbard says, should Kamala run in 28? Maybe. I think, I said this in my last live, I think she is weighing her options. She never ruled out completely a run. What she said is she's not running yet, or she's not announcing yet, or something. It's not in her current future, something like that. She said she wants to currently help Democrats win in the midterms. So she's going to help them win, and I think she's going to gauge what her help does, how she helps gain. If we gain seats, if she backs a long shot candidate in a red district and they win, maybe she reevaluates. There's a lot of time between here and 28, and they need to go ahead, figure out what to do, and figure out if her name and if her brand can be rehabilitated enough to make a big enough move forward with the voters and not be left behind in the dust. Jay says, you never accept an endorsement from the Cheneys if you're a Democrat. Political kryptonite. I think you're part right. You're part right. I think the problem there it wasn't that she accepted the endorsement. I think that was fine. Where she made the mistake was almost every event by the end. She was so convinced, and the people around her were so convinced that she had the Democratic vote locked up and that they could bring in all of these Republican voters. So everywhere she went, you had Liz Cheney by her side. And that turned a lot of voters off. Accepting the endorsement was one thing. Actively campaigning at every stop with Liz Cheney was another. And I think that's where she went wrong. Jules says, has anyone read her book, 107 Days? I have not. I may eventually pick it up and give it a read, but I haven't read it yet. Ocean says, I think Kamala should definitely be the Democratic candidate in 28. Has the recognition factor. Sure. But there are so many potential candidates in the Democratic Party. They have a deep bench. I was talking about that in 22, going into the midterms, before Joe Biden announced that in one of my first appearances on the Rational Boomer podcast, that they have such a deep bench. Just a few names that have been mentioned in the 28 race so far, and there are others. J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, Ossoff out of Georgia, Bashir out of Kentucky. Who else? Shapiro, and was it Roy Cooper out of North Carolina? That's just a few of them. There is Pete Buttigieg, another one. There are so many potential options that could run. The Democrats have such a deep bench. It's uncanny. Whereas Republicans, they're a one-trick pony right now. They run Donald Trump. And since they can't run him in 28, they're probably going to run somebody. They may run J.D. Vance. And if he doesn't run, it'll be somebody else where they're hoping for either a luck win, like with what happened with Bill Clinton, or it's going to be a sacrificial lamb saving their heavy hitters for 32, where they can build somebody up over 4 years as a viable candidate who can break away from Donald Trump. Ocean says they should bring in Rob Reiner. He's very articulate and have lots of progressive viewpoints. But we've been down the celebrity route before. I don't think that's a good idea for Democrats. SoCal Bev says, much deeper and talented bench than the GOP. Exactly. Orielis says, Americans don't care about substance. We need a white guy with a good vibe. Maybe. Hagbard says, Whitmer. Yeah. Gretchen Whitmer, another good candidate. Maybe Jasmine Crockett. Other people have floated the idea of an AOC being on the ticket. Ocean says it takes a celebrity sometimes to beat a celebrity. Yeah, but we're not going to be running against Donald Trump. That's the difference here. Donald Trump is ineligible to run in 28. As we were talking about earlier, he may not make it to 28. Hagbard says, governor from a purple state? Entirely possible. Not that I've been saying I think Rob Sand could win as governor here in Iowa, flipping Iowa back to being a purple state. I don't know if he has presidential ambitions. I don't know, or any of that, but there would be an option for a purple state potentially. Ocean says Pete Buttigieg too much baggage at this point. It would be hard for him to get the black vote. I don't know what that part's about, but one of the reasons his name keeps being brought up is because he can go on Fox News and he can get through to them on Fox News, and he makes them look foolish on Fox, but they keep bringing him back. And that is something that some of the candidates, some of the other Democrats can't seem to do, is they're not landing their punches against him in, friendly territory. Orielis says, we're too racist and misogynistic to select Crockett or AOC. I like him, but won't work. Yeah, that's entirely possible, too. Jill says, I hope people get off their couches to vote in 26 and 28. Yeah, the thing is, I said about the 2020 election, a lot of the states made it super easy to vote because of the pandemic. And when people didn't have to leave their house, all they had to do was go to their kitchen table, grab a pen, fill out the ballot, and drop it in their mailbox, and the mailman would pick it up, and they didn't have to go anywhere to do anything. They were more willing to vote. And Republicans, like here in Iowa, changed the rules. They made it harder to mail in vote. They made it harder to vote early. They took away weeks of early voting here in Iowa. They made it so you had to actually take steps to go get a ballot. Like you had to contact your state auditor's office, I think, in your county to get your mail-in ballot. I think you had to even go there in person. Well, if you are shut in and you can't actually leave, or you have trouble getting around, etc., well, no, you're not going to be able to go vote. And you had to do it in person, or you had to, I don't remember exactly how you had to contact them, but they changed the rules and made it more difficult. And that's what Republicans do. They change the rules when they can't win when they can't win. It's ridiculous. Ocean says bringing in AOC as a running mate to help the young progressive vote would help. Yeah, that could very well do it. SoCal Bev says, I'd like to see Bashir or Ossoff run because they could get moderate Southern voters. Entirely possible. Entirely possible. And that's one of the things, I think, nothing against Tim Walz. I think he was a great pick. But if she would have picked somebody from, a purple state, if she would have picked somebody from a swing state, it may have to end up doing that again. Getting a swing state voter in to help draw in some of the other swing state voters. Ocean says, I think Fox News people believe that Pete would never be able to capture the black vote. That's entirely possible. Jay says we have to run a younger Bernie Sanders, a white progressive guy. They want populists. That's possible. Ocean says Pritzker from Chicago has a problem. He's a billionaire. Yeah, that could be a problem, but he's much different than a lot of the billionaires, and that might work in his favor. Jules says thanks to Chuck Grassley for the voting rules. Hopefully Iowa doesn't vote him in again. Fucking Chuck Grassley. Oh my fucking God. Dude's currently 91 or 92 years old. He has filed to run again in 28. He will be 95 or 96 years old in the 28 midterm or the 2028 elections when he's up again. And he wants to run again. No, he's not 94, I don't think. I think he's 91 or 2. Pretty sure. I think he was born in 33. But I always say he's older than the chocolate chip cookie because he was born before the first printing of the chocolate chip cookie recipe. Well, if he's the same age as your dad and he's 94, well, then that's even worse. He'll be 98 in 28. 97 or whatever. He'll be 103 when he finishes that term. They need to quit running out these fossils. But unfortunately, people show up to vote and they see a name that they recognize and they check that box. SoCal Bev says, I love it when you say that Grassley, when you were in 5th grade. Yeah, I remember writing to Grassley in like 5th or 6th grade as a school project. He has been in office longer than I have been alive. He was elected before I was born. Wish I was making it up, but I'm not. Ocean says, hopefully someone will enact age limits on Congress soon. Would take a constitutional amendment. Don't have the votes. He just doesn't have the votes. It would take 300 and something in the House, 67 senators in 38 states. It's not there. I think there should be age limits. Also term limits. I think they need both. And while some people can still be capable well into their 70s, we don't need people in their 90s and 80s in Congress. It's ridiculous. And this is a problem with both sides of the aisle. Remember, Dianne Feinstein just a couple of years ago passed away. She was in such bad shape, and she was a Democrat. But she was in such bad shape that her daughter had power of attorney over her finances. They said, the court had said that she was incapable of dealing with her own money, but she was perfectly capable on voting on legislation to affect American citizens. That makes no sense. Hagbard says, I want more Dems running for every office in U.S. civics in every high school. Yeah, civics would definitely help. There's a lot of people that don't know how our government works. Oh, yes. Ocean says, I believe term limits would take care of all that. They are there because they can be. Well, term limits would help, but age limits also. Because on the off chance somebody is 88 years old, and let's say they have an 18-year limit in the Senate, if they run for their first term at 88, they could still end up being 106 in the Senate, assuming they would win 3 elections and be alive for that. If you have both, you prevent somebody who is ridiculously old from running for that term in the first place. So you don't have these people that are that far up there in years making decisions when, it's not going to affect them long term, and they are so far removed from the reality younger people are facing. Jay says, I've said this before. We don't need any guys in Congress who can't get it up anymore. If they can't even do that, how can they govern? Yeah. I mean, we just don't need these old people in Congress. And this is a both sides of the aisle issue. People run because they can. Like I said with Nancy Pelosi, she's like 85 or 86, something like that. And how is it that she keeps winning in San Francisco? You can't tell me there's not at least one more Democrat that could run and win in liberal San Francisco. There's got to be. But she keeps running, and when her name's in the ring, nobody else runs against her. So she gets the nod, and she gets to win again. It's ridiculous. The party needs to tell her to step down, and somebody needs to primary her. Uriella says we need to outlaw PACs. Publicly funded elections only. Well, getting rid of PACs would be a big one. Yeah, I mean, getting rid of PACs would get rid of a lot of the money in politics. And that would be a good thing. SoCal Bev says housing, affordability, and wage increases have to be part of the Dem platform in 2028. Without a doubt. They need to be part of, they need to run on something like a fair deal. A modification of the New Deal from FDR. Fixing the New Deal policies and running on something that simple. That running on something that simple that we're going to give everybody a fair deal, a fair shake at things would be a great platform, going into, talking about wages and affordability. That's how FDR won for 4 terms. He was talking a simple platform, made it simple about getting people to work, putting money in their pocket. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And he modeled his plan off of Teddy Roosevelt and his square deal. It's not wrong to model your stuff off of something else that worked for a different politician. Ocean says our host, for example. You talk about me running for politics? I don't know you want that. And as far as running for San Francisco, I'm not in San Francisco. But I do a pretty good job of just out here explaining things on the other side of it and getting people, trying to get the message out there, also trying to get rid of some of the fear and the emotion out of it, because far too often you get wrapped up in all of it, ends up being overwhelming, and you get freaked out and you start thinking that things can actually happen that can't. And I point out why they shouldn't or can't and the correct process for things. Joseph says term limits. Exactly. They need term limits, but also age limits. I know TJ would say term limits only because there are capable people that are older. But if you also have an age limit, then you prevent people from coming in at that later start point. And maybe it's not necessarily an age limit on its face where you get removed when you cross it, but you have to be over or under a certain age before you get elected to your first term. Jules says, correction, Chuck Grassley is 92, will be 95 at re-election in 28. Yeah, that's what I thought. Either way, older than dirt and doesn't need to be in office, doesn't need to be running for re-election. Joseph says, universal health care and a living wage. Yeah. Problem with universal health care is Republicans are able to flip the script on it, and because we say it's free health care, they think like the doctors aren't getting paid. And they're able to spin it and sell it to the MAGAs as, well, we're just expecting doctors to go out here and work for nothing. That's part of the reason they're against it so much. No, it's just when you have a single payer system where you only have the government paying for your health care, and it's not that the government would make any healthcare decisions for you, it's that they'd be the only ones paying, and they would pay it at 100%. It would be cheaper per person. Now, for some people that never use healthcare at all, would it be more expensive? Probably. But it's a messaging problem. We need to find a way to message it out there to everybody to make sure that they understand that the doctors aren't going to get stiffed, that they're not going to be expecting to work for nothing, and that it's not going to be a matter of the government making health care decisions. It's basically going to say, you go to your doctor, you get whatever treatment the doctor determines is best. There's no prior authorization bullshit. There's no, well, did you try X, Y, and Z first? If the doctor says you need X, you get X, whatever that is. Done. And sure, you would still need to have the doctors carry like malpractice insurance and things like that against making bad recommendations and doing things that are against standard units of standard care, ideas. Things like that. But it wouldn't be up to the doctor, or wouldn't be up to the government to decide what care you get. Your doctor would have final say, and you could get the care you need regardless. And I think that's the big thing. Ocean says, I think the host idea about age limits wouldn't pass on unconstitutional grounds. Not if it passes as a constitutional amendment. It can't be unconstitutional if it's an amendment to the Constitution. And there is only one limit to what can be an amendment. And that is the fact that you can't change equal representation in the Senate. So that's listed out in the body of the Constitution. So we could never alter it to make it so that the Senate works like the House on population base. But if we decided that we wanted to amend the Constitution and every state now gets 3 senators, we could do that. But we couldn't make it so it's population based, so you get 50 out of California and only 1 from Wyoming. It's got to be even. Joseph says, Dems have horrible vernacular. Yes, they lose on messaging all the time because they say things in a dumb way. Like defund the police. Republicans were able to run with defund the police as meaning that they wanted to take away all the money from police forces, and they wouldn't be able to respond to any sort of crime or whatever or anything. When the whole idea was to take some funding and put it into other resources where other groups would be the ones responding to certain situations, and they'd be better capable to handle those situations. Like somebody having a mental health crisis shouldn't get the cops called on them. There should be a social worker. But the Democrats lost the message in there, and Republicans were able to twist it and beat them over the head with it. Ocean said, could you choose your own doctor? That was one of the problems with Obamacare. Yeah. The thing with universal health care, if they do it right, it would be you just go to any doctor in the country. No, you wouldn't need any recommendations. So if you decide you need to go see, a specialist for something, you can just go to the specialist. You don't necessarily need a referral. If you need to go see whatever doctor, you just go. Your doctor decides your course of treatment, it would get covered. There wouldn't be 18 layers of bureaucratic red tape buried by private companies, like insurance companies, that want to make a buck. And that's the problem. Universal health care, if done right, could actually work. And the problem is with Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act is Republicans were able to do what they always do. They mischaracterized a big chunk of the bill. Now, there were some problems because certain plans still didn't cover all of the doctors and you had to switch doctors. I know that was an issue. And Obama had said, well, no, you got to keep your doctor. Well, you only got to keep your doctor if you selected the right plan. And that's because private insurance is bullshit. And they had to pass what they could pass with the Affordable Care Act with Republican help. Because they never had the votes to pass it, they were going to put in something like universal health care in the Affordable Care Act as an option, but Republicans blocked it. Let's see. Ocean says it would be difficult to have an amendment passed like ever passed in our country. Possibly, but if they do it as an amendment where they, as far as age limits, saying no one over the age of 68 can be elected to this office. It's no different than what they currently have, which is considered constitutional for the president. Nobody under 35 can be elected to president. It is, if they can do it for a age on the low end, there should be no problem that they can do it on the high end with an amendment. It'd just be getting all of the states to agree to it. Excuse me. Jewel says farmers get socialism through bailouts as well as other large corporations. Yeah. Farmers get bailouts all the time. Companies get bailouts. The banks got bailed out. But they have twisted the word socialism again into something negative. They were able to twist the word and make it into something bad when it really wasn't. But that's what Republicans do all the time. Ocean says Republicans did it like they were going to get rid of the officers and replace with social workers. Yeah. That's the thing with when they were using defund the police. The Republicans were able to spin that messaging because the Democrats messaged it horribly and lie about what the Democrats actually wanted to do because they messaged it so bad. Ocean says, who would the doctors and the administrators be working for in the universal system? They'd be working for the U.S. government, sort of. Basically, you would have the doctors would be working, they'd still be able to have their practice, but with a universal system, they wouldn't get to set prices anymore. There wouldn't be pricing necessarily. It would be a fixed setup, potentially, of maybe a range where, okay, we are going to pay for a simple office visit $100 to $150 or whatever the range is. And that's all they can bill. And there would be a set guidelines for what gets billed, and they would have to be able to prove why they're charging that much. And yes, they'd be able to make some profit so they can get paid, etc. But it wouldn't be like private insurance now where you have a company that is making all this money off of healthcare and not actually paying for healthcare like insurance does. Do Not Go Gently asks, if Dems gain control in 28, how much of Trump's mess would they be able to undo? Depends on how big a margin they get in both chambers. But I think they can undo quite a bit. It's just not going to be quick. It's not going to be cheap. I've been saying it for a while, is that when the Dems get control, we have to give them time to fix it. They need to be able to get in, reverse things, fix things, and figure out what they need to do to prevent it from happening again. That's a tall order. And they're going to have to spend some money to fix a lot of this. And some of it being like international relations. They're going to have to spend a while rebuilding relations like with China to get them to buy American agricultural supplies again. That's not something that is going to be flipping a light switch and say, oh, well, Democrats are in power, all is right with the world. They may not get it done in 4 years. And we have to remember that in 28, to 32, if they don't get it all fixed, or 29 to 33, that if they don't get it all fixed when we vote in 32, that we give them more time to fix it. Problem is, too many people want instant results, and there's a chance that if they don't get enough done, that Republicans could win in 32. And we can't worry about that right now, but we also can't let that happen when we get there. SoCal Bev says, I don't think most Americans understand how universal healthcare works. No, they don't. Ocean says, do you think maybe we are too big of a country to do universal healthcare? No, we're not. We're not too big. It's not that we are too big of a country. It's because we already have the infrastructure there to do universal healthcare. We have all of the physicians. We have doctors' offices everywhere. Maybe not in some of the small towns, but any town of, decent size has got a doctor's office. You got dentists. You got all these things lined up. All you would be doing is getting rid of all of the insurance company bullshit and dealing with it and taking over to the government paying for it. So you wouldn't have premiums. You wouldn't have copays. You wouldn't have deductibles. You wouldn't have any of that bullshit. And you wouldn't have to fight with prior authorization or any of that. If they did it right, all you would have to do is go to your doctor. Your doctor says you need a treatment. You go get whatever treatment that is. Ocean says the problem with socialism is its lack of success in other parts of the world hurts it. Problem is people don't understand socialism. True socialism, yes, would be is a problem, but we already have things in this country that are socialized. You don't pay the fire department when they come put out the fire at your house. You don't do it. Your city property taxes, your local sales tax, whatever may cover that. But you don't pay the fire department for doing it. That's socialism. The government is paying for the service for you. We do things like that all the time. It's the simple fact that Americans don't understand what socialism is in a lot of cases. Oceans is sort of working for the U.S. government is a scary thought. But they wouldn't be fully working for the government. It would be, the government would be the one handling the payment. The government wouldn't get any decisions is in what your health care is at all. It would just be they're handling the payment. And, I'm all for that idea. If my taxes can go to paying for, getting myself health care, great. Then I wouldn't have to pay a premium. I wouldn't have to pay a deductible when I go to the doctor office. You wouldn't have people facing bankruptcy over medical bills. You wouldn't have people losing their houses over medical bills. You wouldn't have people trying to decide if they're paying their rent or their mortgage because they got to go get their insulin this month. Because it would all be paid for. All the government would be handling is the payment side of it. And it would actually give doctors a lot more freedom to give you the care that you need. So you do, I dated a girl for a while, a woman, several years ago. Her son had been on this med. He'd been on it for several years. But every 3 to 6 months, insurance would ask for prior authorization. They would have to go back, schedule a visit, go in and go be seen by the doctor. And then the doctor would have to submit like 2 forms to the insurance that, yes, this is the appropriate med. Yes, we've tried all those other options first. They didn't work. Here's why they didn't work. Here's the side effects. We need to have this med. And then the insurance would finally pay for it. That would be gone in a single payer system like universal health care. You would go to the doctor would say, hey, you need to be on this medicine. You'd say, okay. You'd go to the pharmacy and go, I need this filled. They'd say, okay, here you go, and you leave. You wouldn't even have to pay anything. Done. It'd be so much better. SoCal Bev says, I live near the California-Arizona border. When I go to Arizona, it's like I'm in another country. I get that. I live in a red state, and sometimes when I walk out my front door, I feel like I'm in another country. Ocean says, I'm here from the government, and I'm here to help you. Yeah, that was a quote from Ronald Reagan, and that really hurt things when it came to setting up the government to actually help the American citizen. So-called Bev says, I think the U.S. needs to ensure another Trump cannot be elected for other countries to trust again. Yeah. Exactly. And that would probably take a constitutional amendment changing who could be qualified. Weasel Lady says, Americans pay more for private insurance than Canadians paid monthly for universal health care. Exactly. Ocean says, I don't think everything would be as sunny as you think it is with the government running it. I mean, maybe not. But if you write it the correct way and you do it the correct way, it should be. There wouldn't be all this bullshit that you have right now with private insurance. People are going broke in the system we have right now because of healthcare. Since I started getting my own insurance through my jobs, at one point I was paying $15 a paycheck every 2 weeks for health insurance with a $450 deductible. Now I'm paying almost $50 a paycheck, but I've got a $5,000 deductible. It went from being semi-affordable and insurance actually covering some stuff to through the roof. If they can fix it with universal health care or make it better than that, it's got to be great. Oceans asks, who are the doctors and administrators going to be responsible to directly? Ultimately, there would be some sort of regulatory commission or something put in place. But like everything else, you already kind of have that with malpractice lawsuits and licensing boards. If somebody is grossly incompetent, they get their license pulled. There's reviews of their license. There's all sorts of things. That wouldn't go away. Weasel Lady says, with Canadian government running our healthcare, our government also deals with pharmaceutical prices. Yeah, exactly. They cover all of it. They could set a base. Maybe it's $5 a script, no matter what the script is. It's entirely possible. Who knows? But we got to attempt something because it's not working the way it is. Bridget says universal health care is necessary in the United States. Yeah, something's necessary. We can't keep going the way we're going. Ocean says the Veterans Administration has socialized medicine in our country. Is that what we want for everyone? VA is also horribly underfunded. The only way universal health care would work would be basically they would have to create it so that every bill gets paid regardless. The VA is limited in how much funds they get every year, etc. And they should be able to be better funded. The lady says, government just pays for it, doctors run it. Yeah, exactly. Joseph says, what's thought on the purple movement? I've heard bits and pieces about this, of people who are red voters. They're finally seeing the light, and they want to come together as some sort of coalition. Problem is, as a different creator pointed out, if they'd actually saw the light, they wouldn't still be Republican. They'd be independent or Democrat. And, I mean, if they're willing to come across the aisle and they've finally learned, sure. But they need to be Um, they need to be held to, they need to, we can't just say, okay, everything's going to be fine, come back over, and we'll be fine here. No, that's not how that's going to work. It's not going to be all rainbows and unicorns. Sure, you saw the light for now. How long till you go back? Did you really learn anything? Or is it going to be just, let's just move past this guy, but then we're going to go back to doing what we were doing before? I'm just very skeptical. Ocean says, what should be and what will actually be based on reality are two different things. I mean, yeah, but doctors already have a standard of care that they have to provide. There's already licensing boards in place. Those wouldn't change. All that would change is who's paying for the health care. And what they need to do is find a way to word it and to write it so that it can't be easily changed. And I think the thing is, like, if Democrats somehow passed it in the early part of 29, by the time it got off the ground and running and the next presidential election would come up, it'd be actually pretty popular. And there wouldn't be the desire for the Republican Party to try to change it because people would like it. And that's the thing. Yeah, we need to get it passed, and then once people start realizing what it is, they're going to like it, and that will take away the incentive for Republicans to try to reverse it. Look at the Affordable Care Act. They still kind of talk about repealing and replacing it, but they also know it's very popular because people now like it. It's been around long enough. There's a lot of people who don't remember what it was like before the Affordable Care Act. Shannon says, pay $240 a check with a $1,500 deductible for her daughter and I would come out ahead with Universal. Exactly. Joseph says, having a middleman always raises prices. Healthcare should be socialized like police and fire. Yep. And we know some of that works. The thing with everyone gets scared about it with it being healthcare, thinking the government's going to have their hand in it and say, no, you can't have that procedure. That's not what universal healthcare, at least the way most of it should be, is that it should be they just pay the bill and you don't have any more bills. And I'd be all for that. SoCal Bev says, my mom was on VA and had dementia. Her VA benefits were a lifesaver for her. Yeah. Ocean says, the VA benefits, if they work right, they are great. The problem is they're underfunded. They need, and again, that's partially Republicans' fault. They want to say and tout that they're for the troops, they're for the veterans, etc. But when it comes time to give them benefits, they run away. Problem in our country is that Democrats and Republicans have a different set of values. They have a very different set of values. Ocean also asks, who's going to come up with the money? Well, your taxes would have to go up. Well, somebody's taxes would have to go up. Here's the problem. At one time in our country, when things were actually good for the middle class and the lower classes, the top 1% of this country was paying 91% income tax, or 97%, something like that. Well, under the Trump tax plan, they got reduced to 35. You could raise their taxes and cover universal health care, and they would still have more money than any of us than they can spend in a lifetime. And then beyond that, even if our taxes went up some in response to that, I guarantee you it would still be overall less than what you pay for deductible, what you pay for coinsurance, what you pay for co-pays, what you pay for your premiums, all of it. It is so expensive for healthcare in this country, and it doesn't have to be. Ocean says Republicans want to end all of the subsidies that are keeping Obamacare viable. I mean, yeah, the subsidies are helping, but that's part of the problem with private insurance. Republicans also didn't let them put in everything they wanted into the Affordable Care Act. They couldn't get it passed without giving to Republican demands, and we got past what could get passed. It's not a perfect system. It's better than what we had before. I remember what it was like before the Affordable Care Act. And it was the wild, wild west when it came to insurance in some cases. You had yearly limits and lifetime limits that your insurance company could drop you for any reason, even on employer-based health plans. Doesn't matter. You could end up getting dropped. They could tell parents whose baby was born with a birth defect, well, so you were born with it, but that's a pre-existing condition. We don't want to cover that. There were so many issues with private insurance at that point. It was a step in the right direction, but it's far from perfect. Ocean says, why do they always talk about taxing the billionaires, but they never do it? Simple. Democrats never do it when they're in the majority because they're afraid of the optics of raising taxes. Because there is a big section of this country, it does not matter how you phrase raising taxes. You could come out and say, I am going to raise taxes on only people who make more than $100 billion a year. And it affects like 12 people in the country or whatever. But the simple fact you said raising taxes, they will end up saying, well, my taxes are going to go up. I don't like you. Yeah, but sit down. You make $30,000 a year. You are so far from that 100,000 mark, it's not funny. Shannon says, with a tax increase, but subtract what I pay per check alone, it would save me money for universal health care. Exactly. Most people would come out ahead. And there's a group of people in this country who would actually seek medical help for issues that they weren't before. Because they didn't have health insurance. They didn't want to deal with the bill. They didn't want, they didn't want to go broke. They didn't want to lose their house or whatever. So they let things go for way longer than they had to because they couldn't afford it. With universal health care, they would end up getting care. And that's the main thing. And that would actually bring costs down if everybody was actually getting the care they needed. Or and those bills were all getting paid. It would actually bring prices down across the board because part of the reason healthcare is so expensive is right now in this country, if you show up to the ER, they have to stabilize you. They have to figure out what's wrong and stabilize you. And if you absolutely can't pay, sure, they send that bill to collections. If it never gets paid, they have to write it off. Well, in order to make that money back up for the hospital and the insurance companies, they have to raise rates on everybody else. So that would be gone. You show up at the ER because you have a problem, you get fixed, there you go. You go on your way with no bill. It'd be so much better. SoCal Bev says, I have asthma. Before the ACA, was unable to get insurance. Meds alone were $800 a month. Exactly. Ocean says, my daughter, who was completely healthy, had to pay nearly $1,200 a month premium for Obamacare. I mean, I know there are some plans on the Obamacare exchanges that are very expensive. Some other plans are a lot cheaper. I know I was working full-time, and I thought, at the one company I was working at, I thought our insurance was really good, and the premium was relatively cheap. And one of my coworkers said he got just as good a coverage or better through the Affordable Care Act exchange for less money. So I don't know. It could have been picked the wrong plan? Not sure. Ocean says, I don't really understand it. Don't you go to the emergency room for emergencies? That's part of the problem. There's a lot of people that go to the emergency room here in the United States, not for emergencies, because they don't have insurance. You go to a primary care doctor and you need treated, they can turn you away. If you go to an ER in the United States, they have to at least figure out what's wrong with you and stabilize you enough that you are better enough and send you on your way. And there are people without insurance that use that knowing they won't have to pay the bill. It's kind of shitty, but they do it because they don't have any other options. Ocean says, do you think we have a very big national debt problem both parties seem to ignore? Both parties don't ignore it. Democrats choose to ignore it, mostly. Republicans, they only ignore it when they're in power. When the Democrats are in power, they rail on the national debt. But how we got to pay down this debt, we got to pay down this debt. Some debt is good. We should never be in a full surplus. But if they would actually raise taxes on the ultra wealthy and close some of these loopholes, we could pay down some of that debt and actually be going in the right direction. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, we do have a national debt problem, but we can, if we did more to close tax loopholes and go after the people paying, we need to go we need to go after billionaires and make them pay their fair share. Ocean says, why do we talk so much about taxing billionaires and we never do it? Not just one party. Well, Republicans like to bow to billionaires. The last two tax cuts have been passed by Republicans, by Donald Trump specifically, and they have given billionaires major tax breaks. We talk about it because at one time in this country, when we were very prosperous, when you could afford, when the middle class was actually existed, and one person could support a family of four on a single income, on one 40-hour-a-week job, and you were able to own a business and make it as a small business owner, only employing yourself and supporting a family of four, the wealthiest were paying 91%. That's why we talk about it. Unfortunately, Democrats don't do it because they know if they raise taxes, there is a section of this country that will never come close to making $1 billion in their lifetime. But they hear the word raise taxes, they are convinced their taxes are going up. 100%. Doesn't matter. And the Republicans refuse to touch the billionaires. Jewel says Republicans have railed the debt. Is that what you meant to say? No, well, they've done that too. No, they rail against the debt when Democrats are in charge, saying, oh my God, how bad's the debt? We got to do something, we got to do something. And then the minute they get in charge, they run it as a campaign slogan to get in power, and then they ignore it when they're in charge. SoCal Bev says, I fear what our deficit will be after this Trump term. Yeah. Ocean says, we have to pay the interest on the national debt every year, and it goes up and up. Yeah, but you know what they do to pay that, Ocean? They borrow more money to pay more of the debt. They borrow more to pay the interest on the previous debt. That's why security bonds and things like that are a good investment, because the government always pays their debts. When you go down and get a savings bond, you pay $25 to get a $50 savings bond, and they tell you, After so many years, we're going to have paid you enough interest, it'll be worth $50. That's how that works. Shannon says, economists say we need to make corporations not have tax loopholes. Look back to 50s and 60s. Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Back when they had high taxes, and you could give them tax breaks. That was one of the things. When they were paying 91% taxes, they had major incentives to invest back into their company, to pay better wages, etc. And that would end up making things so much better all the way around. Jules said, our current debt is because of Republicans, full stop. More Democrats that balance the budget. Yeah. I mean, Bill Clinton left us with a surplus, and then George W. Bush squandered it. Ocean sounds more like an unsustainable Ponzi scam, the way you describe it. I mean, it's not a Ponzi scheme, but we do borrow money to pay the interest. And then when that next interest is due, we borrow more money to pay the interest. Because we're not allowed as a government to go bankrupt. Democrats typically do better at actually lowering the debt. Biden was lowering it. It was higher, but he had actually lowered a bunch of spending. Same with Obama. Bill Clinton gave us a surplus. We actually were bringing in more in tax money than we were spending. For like 2 years, I think it was. Handed off a great economy and a tax surplus to George W. Bush, and he squandered both. Sharon says, we also can't afford to keep subsidizing chosen businesses, right? Certain businesses can't fail. Unfortunately, they have to subsidize certain things. Farmers, for one. One of the reasons they keep subsidizing farms is because without the subsidies, farmers couldn't afford to actually grow and maintain a crop. They have to do it because their inputs would be higher, their cost would be higher than what the agriculture product is currently selling for on the world market. And if they don't subsidize, there'd be nothing grown here in the United States. And with nothing grown here, we would have to bring in all of our grain and agricultural supplies from other countries. So we have to. Same with the banks. We had to subsidize them. Some of the banks got too big to fail. They had to get bailed out. Why? Because we saw with the Great Depression what happens when banks fail. Shannon says, especially in Iowa, since we have so many corporate farms. Family farms have to survive. Yeah. Even corporate farms, though, they need the subsidies just as much as the family farmer. They still wouldn't be able to produce it at a low enough rate to make any money. Ocean says it's hard for me to distinguish between tax loopholes and subsidies. Okay. A tax loophole is they figure out a way, like, for example, I'll pick on Elon Musk, okay? Let's say Elon Musk sets his corporate salary at $10, but says in lieu of pay, they're going to give him 1,000 shares of stock a week. Well, as long as he holds that stock for a year and a day, he doesn't pay any taxes on the stock. So whatever value it's gained, he made that money free and clear of no taxes. Ocean says we put these tax laws within our system for a reason, right? No, not necessarily. Like I was just saying with the Elon Musk situation, they found the loopholes and found ways to exploit them. They set their pay at ridiculously low levels, so they only have, a little bit of income. And then they turn around and they get paid in other ways that still makes them tons of money that they never pay a dime of taxes on. And then they take those stocks, for example, they turn around and borrow against them, get a loan on that money, and they're using that money for a year or 2 years as a loan while the stock gains value, and they get around paying any taxes on any of it. They found a loophole that was never covered in the tax code and has never been fixed. Shannon says, and with the tariffs, I'm scared for my fellow Iowans that are in agriculture. Yeah. The tariffs aren't helping either, because Donald Trump doesn't understand tariffs at all. He has no clue how they actually work. He thinks the other countries pay the money into our treasury when it comes from us. Musk pays minimum to what we pay in Social Security, for example. How is that fair? It's not. It's not fair. Not at all. Again, they found loopholes. Ocean says, do you think Elon Musk is the largest taxpayer in the country like he says? No, not in the least. They all have ways of getting around paying taxes. Like I was saying, they get paid in stocks and they borrow against the stocks. And then turn around and use that money as spending money while getting paid, less. And then they use the money they borrowed from their stocks to buy more stock. They have found ways to get money out of things without actually paying taxes on it. I mean, in terms of dollars, maybe in terms of actual dollars, but that's still irrelevant. Because even if he pays more in taxes than most people, even if he does pay more dollars in taxes, which I doubt, he should, because it doesn't affect him nearly as much. When you've got $500 billion, even if you tax him at 91%, that would still leave him with what? 10 billion? 20 billion? Something like that? He would still have way more money than most of us will ever see in our lifetime. Whereas you hit us at 25% of our income. For some people that are making 30 grand a year, 25% is $7,500. That's a significant change. Ocean says, we've been subsidizing the electric car industry for years. Elon's been benefiting. Yeah. He, as Jules says, Elon is the biggest socialist within our government. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Imagine if Elon paid what he was supposed to. Still drops in the bucket for him. Yep. It doesn't affect them nearly as much as what raising our taxes does. And it's ridiculous. But I've been going well over an hour and a half now. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap up this live. For those of you that have been here before, you know the drill. This will go up over on my YouTube channel at some point tonight, once I can get it downloaded from TikTok. You You can follow me over on YouTube, Analytical Iowan, over there. The audio will also be going up over to my Spotify page, Analytical Iowan on Spotify. And I'm going to go ahead and hopefully be doing these more often. Hopefully we get more people more consistently. Hope my schedule kind of straightens out a little bit and I can do these more often on a consistent basis. That's part of why I haven't been doing them as often. And I've been lucky enough to jump in when Mike at The Rational Boomer's been live. So you can catch me there. But check me out over on YouTube at Analytical Iowan or Spotify if you want to check, also at Analytical Iowan. If you want to catch the rest of this live, if you missed part of it, or just want to hear it again, it'll be up there after whatever point TikTok finally lets me get it downloaded and I can get it posted. So thanks for joining me and have a good night.